Around October 2024, the Hear Me Out cake trend started on TikTok. The trend has people put pictures of characters or concepts they find attractive on a cake, but they're extremely unconventional. That's why it's a Hear Me Out, because you have to explain it. Tumblr has a reputation for being unhinged, and as a Tumblr citizen, yeah. Yeah, it is. And when the Hear Me Out cake trend was going on, a lot, and I mean a lot, of Tumblr users were extremely confused to being a bit mean about people's Hear Me Outs. It wasn't that they thought the Hear Me Outs were ugly, or it was a stupid trend or anything. It was because they considered them to be too bland to be Hear Me Outs. Tumblr is a monster fucker haven, so when someone says their Hear Me Out is Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, a lot of Tumblr users are going to be confused because that's just some guy to them. Hell, I've even seen Tumblr user violence when someone said their Hear Me Out was Gantu, whatever, from Lilo and Stitch, and this other person replied, "Hear me out, and it's the most conventionally attractive alien father figure you've ever seen." And the notes were all people arguing over whether Gantu was a true Hear Me Out, or if he was too conventionally attractive to be considered one. And some people also correctly pointed out that Tumblr's so far into monster fucking that our idea of what's conventionally attractive and what isn't is extremely skewed. And to be honest, the whole argument about Gantu kind of proves that. In the Twist fandom, Malleyuu is one of, if not the most popular Yuu ship. And while yeah, I'm sure part of that is because of self-shipping, it still blows the other Yuu ships out of the water with the sheer amount of content. People love this ship, myself included. This is one of my favorite ships in the game. I've been on Tumblr since my junior year in high school, during the heyday of Super Hulock, and I've seen some things. I know a lot of users are going to disagree with what I'm about to say when it comes to Malleyuu, but like those TikTokers, here's my Hear Me Out. Malleyuu is inherently a monster fucker ship. Cue the discourse, cue the screaming. I know half of you are like, well, duh, it's a monster fucker ship. Malleus is literally a dragon. And the other half are like, that's not a Hear Me Out. Malleus is just a human-looking guy with horns and sometimes a tail and back spikes. Just because he can be a dragon sometimes doesn't make it a monster fucker ship. Here's the thing though. I don't think Malleyuu is a monster fucker ship just because Malleus is a dragon. Malleyuu is a monster fucker ship because it is so intrinsically tied to the pillars and the history of monster fucking and what makes monster fucking so meaningful for queer people, for disabled people, and for people of the global majority. And also, yes, because he's a dragon. So, today we're going to do a very deep dive into Malleyuu, from their dynamic to a brief overview of monster fucking, to why Malleyuu is the monster fucker ship of Twisted Wonderland. Before we begin, I just want to give some quick disclaimers. When I say Malleyuu, I mean the ship of Malleus and Yuu in any form. I know in some fan circles, Malleyuu and Yuu Malleus are considered different ships with the idea of whose topping changes the dynamic, therefore they're different ships. I'm counting them as the same thing because I think whose topping is not changing the underlying dynamics that make this a monster fucker ship. Also, I don't want to say reversible after every single mention of Malleyuu, so when I say Malleyuu or any ship name, it also encompasses the reverse. My second disclaimer is that there will be spoilers for the following: Chapter 7 of the main story, Malleus' Overblock card, Eternity Float, and Lost in the Book with Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. If you're caught up in JP, you'll be fine, but if not, spoilers. Just a heads up, that's a thing. But with those disclaimers out of the way, let's talk about Malleyuu, starting with a character analysis of Malleus. Fuck. Starting with a character analysis of Malleus. Malleus is someone who's been described as being able to make anything happen. He isn't just the Dragon Crown Prince of Briar Valley, he's one of the strongest and most powerful living mages in Twisted Wonderland. So much so he gets labeled as a living magical disaster because he's that powerful. But as Malleus points out in the final update of Chapter 7, he can't make the one thing he wants the most to happen, being able to connect with people and have companions, like true companions. Malleus is an extremely isolated person, and honestly, there's a lot of contributing factors. It's an extremely hard web to untangle because there's so many things going on at once. Part of it is just circumstance. He's next in line for the throne, and his grandmother Malleyuu is currently ruling until he's old enough to take over. This leaves her extremely busy and unable to spend time with him. And although this hasn't been said, it wouldn't surprise me if Malleyuu purposely avoided Malleus at times. The pain of burying your child is something no parent should ever go through, but Malleyuu's only daughter Malinor was murdered, and Malleus looks a lot like her. I could see Malleyuu being too far into grief to 1, have the energy to spend time with Malleus, but also 2, Seeing him and how much he looks like Malnor might be emotionally painful for her and make her pain worse. When it comes to Lilia, he's been banned from Dragonopolis and only comes if Militia has invited him, or Malleus, or if he feels like sneaking into the city. He hasn't been absent from Malleus' life by any stretch, but it's not like he's living at the castle and watching over him every single day. Militia and Lilia are the two family members Malleus has, and they aren't spending that much time with him. Part of his isolation is because of the blessings bestowed upon him as a baby, and them backfiring hard. His mother, before he hatched, gave him the blessing of Fae revering him and humans fearing him. This makes sense in the context she gave it. They were in a war with humans. But now that there's peace, this blessing is still in effect, but it's turned into a curse. I'm gonna be real here though, I think Fae would have revered him anyway. In Lilia's dream, Briarland Fae are shown to revere the Draconia family, something that annoys Lilia a little bit. But maybe because of Malinor's blessing, it's ramped up to 11. But it still would have been a thing, it's just kind of worse, you know? The castle staff, although they are probably a little afraid of Malleus given how he's accidentally hurt other staff members before, have the same Malleus can do no wrong attitude the Senate does. Being surrounded by yes-men isn't exactly conducive to a great environment, and not to mention there's a power imbalance between him and the staff. Whether it's the castle staff or the people of Briar Valley, it's not like there's even ground for friendship even if he got the chance. It's said when he goes out, he's surrounded by guards, so it's not like he'd be able to just sit down and casually talk to the citizens of Briar Valley anyways. A lot of people on NRC's campus are shown to be afraid of or intimidated by Malleus and want nothing to do with him, with very few exceptions. And even with those exceptions, it's not like they're friends with Malleus, they're just not that freaked out by him. Malleus basically has no friends. As much as people, Malleus, insist Malleus and Leona are friends, no, no, they are not. Malleus may consider Leona a friend, but Leona sure as hell doesn't see it like that and has never shown any kindness to Malleus. Even if they were friends, man, that is a terrible friendship, and that is not true companionship. Malleus does have Lilia, Silver, and Sebek, but these relationships have their own complications. Lilia is his dad, basically. Sebek and Silver are his retainers, and in Silver's case, Malleus helped raise him because Lilia decided that Malleus needed to be parentified, in addition to everything else, apparently. Sure, give a perfectly good dragon eldest sister syndrome, but anyways. Sebek clearly has some hero worship thing going on with Malleus. This is not even ground to have a friendship, and also I want to point out, them all being together like this is a relatively new thing. Malleus has other retainers, so it's not like Silver and Sebek were always with him at the castle. This school year is the first time the four of them have been able to spend every single day with each other regularly. I'm not trying to play down their relationship, I want to make that extremely clear, I'm not trying to downplay it, they have a very special bond, and I love them. But their relationship is a mixture of things with a lot of different factors, so I don't think calling it a traditional friendship is right. They're family, they're friends, but Malleus is also their boss in a sense, and that colors the relationship. Silver, Sebek, and Lilia all have the job of protecting Malleus. This isn't a friendship that happened because they all like the same thing, or they all connected with each other or something. They were spending a lot of time together because they're his retainers. And also his baby brother, kind of. And it's like, do they all love Malleus? Absolutely. Does Malleus love them? Also absolutely. But at the end of the day, Silver, Sebek, and Lilia are also retainers among other things, and that's going to affect their relationship a lot. They have preconceived notions in history with him that affects their friendship. Someone like you, who doesn't and is a blank slate basically, is going to have a very different relationship with him and is going to be more easily able to approach him on a more even ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So imagine you spent your whole life like this. People either fawn over you because of your family, your position, and not you as a person. People coddle you, or they're terrified of you, and the few people who aren't intimidated by you aren't exactly looking for friendship. The closest thing you have to friends is your father figure, your pseudo-little brother that you helped raise, and Sebek. You're incredibly alone, you're constantly isolated, you can count on one hand of people who treat you as a person. And then someone comes along that has no idea who you are and treats you like just some guy. They treat you like they would everyone else. You have finally found someone that sees you as a person. Not a prince, not a powerful mage, but you as a person. You is very interesting because while they're a player stand-in, there are also moments that show that you is still kind of their own character. They're both things simultaneously. And because they're both simultaneously, it's kind of hard to analyze them, especially since we don't get a look into their mind all that often, which is a good and bad thing. For a player stand-in, it's better. For a character, it's not fantastic. So while we have a lot we can analyze about Malleus, we have quite a bit less for Yuu, but it's not like we have nothing. Thankfully, we do have some things to say. Yuu is a human, a basic, magicless human, if you don't count having visions as magic. I don't think people count it as that, but anyways. But even though they lack that power and status Malleus has, it's not like everyone on campus loves them. In fact, they have a surprising amount of haters, which honestly is extremely embarrassing for them. The haters, I mean, not Yuu. We know from Jamil in Book 4 that a lot of people know about Yuu and their special enrollment. This isn't really shown in-game, but the novelization goes into detail about what school life is like for Yuu, and a lot of people on campus actually hate Yuu. In the book, when Yuya, the novel's version of Yuu, is sitting and having lunch, we get this exchange when he locks eyes with some students sitting a bit away from him. Also, he's sitting by himself. I feel like I should probably mention that. Their faces twisted up into sneers, and he, Yuya, immediately hung his head. He could hear giggles and whispered laughter, mocking him. I heard that Normie already got called into Train's office, one student scoffed. For real? I guess there really is no way for a loser who can't use magic to actually be a student here, huh? Another smirked. He's ruining everything. I mean, as students of Night Raven College, we're getting lumped in with a guy like that. It's embarrassing. Again, cannot stress how cringe it is to have beef with just some guy, but okay. The novel also has some brief mentions of Yuu being ostracized from the other students, and this excerpt is just one example. A lot of students don't like that Yuu has no magic but is still allowed to attend Night Raven College. Everyone who's called by the Dark Mirror has the potential to be a great mage, and this school is going to get them there. And then there's this random person with no magical power at all who's allowed to enroll just because some dire beast can use magic, and they, the human, also ended up in a coffin somehow. Night Raven College students are already egocentric and assholes. They're just like that in general, so even without Yuu's special exception enrollment, people were gonna be weird to them anyways. But the fact they're special exception makes things a lot worse. And let's be real, even though these circumstances aren't really shown in-game, it's not like we haven't seen people be weird about Yuu or bully them. As much as I love Ace, Jack, and Sebek, their first interactions with Yuu in the main story were not fantastic. Ace and Jack were almost outright hostile. And, Sebek is Sebek. And while those instances weren't because of Yuu's lack of magic, thankfully, it's still not a great look and in my opinion, kinda shows the vibe on campus. Yuu absolutely has an easier time making friends than Malleus does, that's just a fact, and it's not like everyone hates them unprovoked, but the fact we read about people being hostile to Yuu in some way both in the novel and in-game makes me think that this is probably the reality of the situation. A lot of people do not like them, so anyone completely new that approaches them and isn't hostile, like Malleus, is probably a welcome change of pace. And this isn't even touching on, besides that, like, Yuu has haters, Yuu does have an element of isolation around them. After all, they're the only non-magical student on campus, but they're also the only one on campus that isn't from Twisted Wonderland. At least that we know of right now. They're an outsider not just because they can't use magic, but they're not even from this world. They've been plopped into a world that they know nothing about, with a lot of different rules and customs and culture. While I do believe this is somewhat referenced in-game, to quote the novel again, the eyes around Yuya were powerfully curious and inquisitive, focusing on him in the same way a pack of dogs with nothing to do might look at a mouse released in their midst. He felt not just ordinary, but as though he were surrounded by creatures of an entirely different species. The gazes that bore through him seemed to very eloquently inform him of exactly what his classmates thought of him. You're not one of us. Being magicless, Yuu is considered an outsider. Mages can already be kinda weird about non-mages, and well, this is an example of that. Like, this is pretty straightforward, I don't know what else to say. Yuu is in a brand new world where they know absolutely nothing. A lot of other students are haters, and some are even actively hostile to them. Like, that is just such a shitty position to be in. And while yes, Yuu can and does make friends, it doesn't erase the fact that school life is not exactly great for them, especially since not only do they not know anything, but because they have no magic, they're having to be accommodated by the staff, which probably makes them feel that otherness outside of the students being jerks. So imagine you've been isekai'd to a brand new world. Everything is so vastly different from your own. You know nothing about this world. You're not that much more knowledgeable than a baby. The students in the school are not great. Some are kind, but a lot of them are jackasses and actively hostile to you. You're the only non-magical student there. Despite the few friends you've made, things are just not great for you and you just want to go home. And then imagine this guy just shows up on your dorm grounds. He didn't come here for you, he just likes walking around abandoned places. He has no idea who you are. He has no idea you can't use magic. You're just some random person to him. And when you ask him who he is, he's shocked that you don't know who he is. You two are complete strangers. You don't even know what dorm he's in. You tell him your name eventually, and he actively wants to keep anonymity. He tells you can call him whatever you like. In case you haven't noticed, this guy's weird. He's a weirdo. He doesn't fit in. But he's not actively hostile. In fact, he seems nice enough, and he doesn't know a thing about you. In a school full of people who know all about you and have an opinion about it, he doesn't. You're just some rando to him. He cannot see that you're the magicless student or the person from a whole different world. You're just you to him. That was kind of a pun. I didn't mean to make that a pun. Oh my god. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Malleus and Yuu have a pretty cute dynamic going on, which, considering Malleyuu gets the most ship tease out of any Yuu somebody ship, I'd hope so. Although we don't really get to see their friendship grow, which is a shame, the two are close and care about each other deeply. The two are constantly inviting the other to do things, or doing things to make sure the other feels involved. During Terror is Trending, Malleus opts to hold the Insomnia stamp rally spot at Ramshackle, explaining that part of the reason is to make sure Yuu can have a fun Halloween and doesn't get left out of the festivities. He also invites them out places, as seen in the Nightmare Before Christmas event. The whole event starts because Malleus invited Yuu to a secondhand book fair that Setback had told him about. When he's not inviting them out, he's dropping anvil-sized hints to Yuu that he wants them to ask him to do something. Like in his Bloom birthday lines, he says he wants someone to take him to a new cafe in town. And although they're just there for school stuff, when they're at Topsy Turvy Fest and Glorious Masquerade, Malleus says he wants to sit next to Yuu during the show. He clearly loves spending time with them and wants to spend time with them. And Yuu's the same way. When they have a +1 ticket for VDC, they invite Malleus to go with them. They could have invited Jack, or Kate, or Trey, but no, they specifically gave the ticket to Malleus and watched the show with him. Just like Malleus likes spending time with them, so do they. And this isn't even touching on how Malleus visits Ramshackle often. If he didn't want to see Yuu, he wouldn't go there so often. And if Yuu didn't want to see him, they could just pretend to be asleep when he comes by. But they don't, as far as we know. The bottom line is that they aren't just accidentally running into each other and deciding to hang out because it's convenient, which we have seen other people do in the game before. They're actively considering each other and also making the effort to do things together. They genuinely enjoy each other's company. And outside of hanging out, they both do things that show that they have a massive soft spot for each other. You can be a bitch sometimes, let's be real here. They have quite a few lines where they'll say something honestly kind of mean. Ace seems to be the target more than Deuce, but they definitely have playfully bullied Deuce a few times. Malleus, however, not really. While yeah, they've annoyed him by poking him one too many times or making a face at him, they've never given Malleus the same treatment they've given Ace and Deuce. And considering Malleus and Yuu are shown to be pretty close, I find that interesting. To me, it implies Malleus is special since he's not getting the same treatment as Ace and Deuce. Which is wild, considering Malleus absolutely has a few lines that are kind of mean to Yuu. In his Labware voice lines, when he's offering to help Yuu with their homework, he says he wasn't expecting anything from Yuu to start with. Oof. Or during one of his level up lines, where he says it's, quote, time for me to reevaluate my opinion of you. Fucking ow! And the fact that even though he's dishing it out sometimes, Yuu doesn't, for reference, Yuu and Ace will absolutely read each other regularly. If Yuu says something, Ace will say something back, or he'll make a comment or something. Yuu will tease Deuce, but he never does it back. Yuu absolutely goes her with their friends, so the fact they don't with Malleus, even though he does, it says a lot. That's insane. That screams special treatment to me. When they're interviewing people during the Birthday Boy card set, Malleus is one of the two that Yuu compliments, the other being Idia. Yuu makes a point to say the Birthday Boy's suit is flattering on Malleus. The fact Yuu compliments Malleus and not any of their other friends tells me that Malleus is special to them and getting special treatment. Malleus is the only friend Yuu compliments, and it being an appearance-based one is a little, in my opinion. And likewise, Malleus does other things to show he's got a massive soft spot for Yuu. He's an exception to Yuu, he makes Yuu an exception. In one voice line, he says, "You're the only one who makes me wait. It's fine though, I'll allow it from you." He just straight up says he's giving you leeway he doesn't for others. And that's not the only voice line he has that illustrates this. He has another where he says, "By all means, ask more of me. For you, I shall deliver." Like, I don't think I really need to explain these. He's very open about giving you special treatment that he doesn't give to other people. In addition to that, he's openly vulnerable with them, and he's not really like that with many people. He unprompted, by the way, tells you he's afraid to lose them. Him saying that doesn't really need an explanation. That's a very vulnerable thing to say to someone. When he's upset about Lilia dropping out of NRC, where does he go? To Ramshackle. And while that alone implies that Ramshackle and you are sources of comfort for him, he then goes on to tell you about a pretty awful memory from his childhood. He trusts them enough to talk about that sort of thing, but again, I think the fact Malley is going to you when he's upset speaks volumes about how he feels about them. Not to mention, during his overblot, when the domain magic is lifted from Sage's Island and people are fleeing Diasomnia, Thorns drag you back into the dorm, and where do they end up? In Malleus's inner sanctum, the lounge, where he's keeping Lilia. He brings you back to his lair where his father figure is. The one he was so terrified of losing that it kickstarted this whole mess. While I don't know if I would say Yuu is as important to Malleus as Lilia is, the fact he had the Thorns drag them there to me implies that they're extremely important to him. When he's losing control over everything, he still seeks out Yuu. But Yuu gets other special treatment from him. Malleus lets them touch his horns. During both Terror's Trending and the Nightmare Before Christmas event, he gets violently angry with people grabbing his horns, one of those people being a, 6-year-old girl? I don't know how old Shock is. Also, I had to look up her name because I didn't know what her name was. But yeah, his temper knows no bounds. And of course, consent is a part of that. Those other people did not have his consent. But the fact he gives you permission displays his trust in them. Especially when we learn that horns are one of a dragon's weaknesses. Queen Militia says the weak spots of a dragon are the head, heart, belly, I'm pretty sure she says belly, and horns. While striking horns isn't fatal, it heavily affects their ability to cast magic because the horns act as an antenna and amplifier for magic. So he's not only trusting you to touch one of his weak spots, but something that would greatly affect his life if it got injured. That is so much trust to put into them. And speaking of horns, he's very protective over you. That segue made way more sense in my mind, but it makes sense in real life, I promise. When his horn is broken and he's having some magic control issues, when you prods him too much, he actually snaps at them, saying he doesn't have a lot of control over his magic, and he doesn't want to accidentally hurt them. Malleus hardly ever gets snippy with you, so him being angry shows how serious he is about wanting you safe. Malleus is very protective of you and worries about them. When the floor trapdoor thing in Noblebell College swallows up the students, including you, Malleus visibly panics. And he says not too long after they're all safe and everything, that he was trying to protect you, but he couldn't even get himself protected until the last minute. Yeah, they wouldn't have been able to save themselves, but also, he does care about them deeply. And to be honest, he could have left you to someone else. I mean, Train did end up saving a lot of the students. But one of Malleus's top priorities was you and no one else. The other students needed help too. Malleus only tried to save you, and that's pretty clearly illustrating he's very protective of them and cares about them a lot, especially considering they're one of his priorities in a life or death situation. Because let's be real here, if they fell through and no one had magic, they were all just magicless humans, that fall would have killed them. It would have killed all of them. Also, I don't have a smooth transition into this, but Malleus has a load of lines that read as flirty or at least raise an eyebrow. He's not the only person to have lines like this, but it just feels like a lot. I literally went through every single voice line for every single card he has, except Eternity Float, because that literally came out as I was writing this. But he has an average of 2 flirty lines per card. While I don't have the data to compare that to other characters, it feels kind of high. And also, like I was talking about earlier, there's also quite a few flirtatious lines where Malleus is asking you to go with him somewhere or hinting very strongly he wants you to ask him to go do something, or he wants them to invite him over to Ramshackle where they'd basically be alone. And also, just some of the stuff he says, there is no heterosexual explanation for it. It just reads he's smitten as hell. Originally, I was gonna put in a whole segment of every single line I felt was flirtatious, but it was getting kind of long, so I'm just gonna pick the top 5 damn, Malleus is really down bad for you lines.
僕の夢も覗いてみたい。 角太郎呼ばわりから始まって、お前は本当に肝が据わっている。お前といると、時が経つのを忘れてしまうことがある。こんな感覚は初めてだ。臆さず僕に触れるとは。よい。許す。悪い気はしない。お前と話し込んでいたらジェラートが溶けてきた。グリムを真似て、一口で平らげるか。服飾品だけでなく、化粧も実に華やかだ。目元は特にわかりやすいぞ。もっと近くで見るといい。
Time and time again, Malleus and Yuu has shown that they really like spending time together. They make the effort not just to hang out, but to make sure the other feels included in things. They also have their own tells, illustrating that they have a soft spot for each other. Yuu is far nicer to Malleus than they are their other friends. Malleus has enough trust in Yuu to let them touch one of the most important parts of his body. Not to mention he's fairly vulnerable with them and very protective over them. These things are a part of what makes them a cute couple to me. But there's also another major factor to me loving Malleyuu, and that is, of course, it being like the perfect package of a monsterfucker ship, because although monster love seems pretty straightforward, to be honest, it's really not. Monster romance has existed for literal centuries, and as something that has existed for centuries, it's gonna be fairly complex. Hell, the definition of and stable concepts of monsterfucking are gonna change depending on who you ask. Although, I'll admit my bias early on, I do think there's a right way to do it, but I'll get into explaining that later. But my point right now is that there's differences with monsterfucking in the history, and how that history has shaped the genre as a whole is really rich. Scholars speculate that monsterfucking came from animal bridegroom stories of folklore. You know, the ones where a human marries an animal or some kind of non-human creature, but it turns out the animal or creature is actually a hot person. There's the Frog Prince, Beauty and the Beast, etc., etc. I could go on for hours listing all these stories. A lot of these early animal bridegroom stories are geared towards cis women, where a woman has been married or is being kept by some kind of animal or creature. In the end, the woman's virtue, culture dependent, turns the animal into a handsome man who's most of the times very wealthy and is now the world's best husband because the wife has changed him for the better. To quote Lindsay Ellis in her video My Monster Boyfriend, these folktales originate in times when arranged marriages were the norm in pretty much every culture on Earth. Many arranged marriages must have seemed like being tethered to a monster, and the telling of stories may have furnished women with a socially acceptable channel for providing advice, comfort, and the consolation of imagination. See, girls, he may seem like a horrible monster, but you know, maybe if you're really nice and virtuous and self-sacrificing, you can change him. For cis women, animal bridegroom stories were a way to prep them for arranged marriages and kinda calm them down a bit. After all, the idea of marrying a stranger you don't love or even really know is kind of terrifying. So these stories, in addition to steering women into always acting on traditional gender roles of the time, would have been a way to tell them that it won't be so bad. And then it probably was that bad, but I digress. These stories also existed for cis men, and while some of them have the same meanings, between genders, not gonna lie, the vibes for the men's stories is more rancid than it is for, women. There's two kinds of these stories. The first type is the man, for whatever reason, has to marry a creature, or maybe just a really ugly lady. He's not exactly down for the idea, but relents and goes through with the marriage. When he decides to be nice to his wife and be a decent husband, if she's a creature, she turns into a beautiful woman, or if she was already human, she turns hot. He gets his reward, an attractive wife. Once he, 1, treats his wife like a person, and 2, humbles himself in the eyes of other men, and let's be real here, society, by marrying an unconventionally attractive person, or unconventionally period, when dictated by fate, or family, or whatever. The message to men in these cases is, hey, don't be a dick to your wife. She may be ugly, but she can still be useful to you. Also, you need to go with what your family's telling you to do. The other kind is men finding beautiful supernatural creatures and then trying to seek complete control over them via marriage. There's a lot of folktales of men trying to control their animal brides only to end up in really awful marriages. Princess Weeks, in her video Why We Fall for Monsters, gives the example of selkies. Men will forcibly marry them, coercing them by taking away their fur so they can't go home, but once the selkie gets her fur back, she's rightfully out. Moral of the story? My brother in Christ, what the fuck is wrong with you? However, as the centuries have passed, we as humans have started to move away from these kinds of stories, or at the very least tweaked them. And to get there is a little bit of a walk, so let's have some fun and let me put on some video essay lighting. Oh god, I hate James Somerton. But I do love a bit. Okay, that's enough of the bit. This lighting combo is ugly as hell. Art is not made in a vacuum, and while some meaning can be unintentional, stories reflect the world around the creator and the time period it was created in. A lot of, if not every, folktale is that sort of thing. These stories are created by cultures to explore feelings, to discuss fears, and they can tell us a lot about the people who loved these stories. Like I said earlier, the animal bridegroom stories were made to calm people down about impending arranged marriages. But stories about monsters aren't just made to tell people to shut up and marry whoever their family tells them to. Monsters can mean a whole host of things. After all, monsters are contextual to the culture they're birthed from. Frankenstein, published in 1818, discusses the idea of man playing God and creating life from corpses. This was written at a time where people were having fears around science and religion clashing. After all, this was when there was body snatching going on in the UK. Christianity did not like dissection, and religion influenced the law, so dissection was illegal in England for a long time. The law was lessened, but it wasn't enough for scientists and doctors to get quality education on the human body. Since there was a short supply of legal bodies okay for dissection, corpse theft started happening. Hell, Mary Shelley was inspired by the nightmare she had after hearing her future husband, or maybe they were already married, I don't know if they were already married then, and their friend, professional fuckboy Lord Byron, talk about disturbing experiments and the possibility of corpses being brought back to life. These fears are a core part of Frankenstein's monster. Carmilla, published in 1872, has the titular vampire antagonist as, quote, a sexually liberated, independent figure who cannot be controlled by men. She spends her time seducing women, in particular the protagonist of the novella, Laura. This novel has a lot going on, though, with its symbolism. This was published when some of the earliest women's rights movements were starting up in the UK. While Carmilla represents sexual independence and female sexuality, particularly when it comes to same-sex attraction, she's a reflection of Victorians' fear of women no longer adhering to traditional gender roles. And also the Victorians were really homophobic. I feel like that goes without saying, but they were pretty homophobic. Carmilla seducing women, while most of modern Tumblr, myself included, would consider this incredibly based, would have been seen as horrifying to a lot of Victorians, but then again, because of her independence and no need for a man, they would have been afraid of her anyways. But queerness is a part of the horror there. Dracula, published in 1897, has the vampire seducing women both in the novel and also before it starts with the women who were his brides and are now his daughters. It's a long story, I don't want to get into it, this is not a Dracula video. Vampires, not just Dracula but Carmilla and others as well, have long been symbolic of sex and people's fear around sex and sexuality. But Dracula has some, even more uncomfortable things going on with it. There's a lot of emphasis on how different he looks from the British main cast, leading to the reading of Dracula not just as the fear of sex, but also the fear of foreigners. Yeah. And like with Carmilla, I don't think I need to tell you the racism and xenophobia in Victorian England were off the charts. Monsters are contextual. Their being reflects the world that they were created in and what people were fearing at the time. And because a lot of Western history revolves around bigotry, a lot of monsters were symbolic of the other. The other is basically what it says on the tin. It's a term for anything a culture has deemed isn't the norm. It's different sexualities, being outside of the gender binary, being outside of the racial majority. It's not what the quote-unquote standard person is, which is fucking yikes, to put it lightly. But like I touched on with Carmilla and Dracula, monsters representing the other have been around for a while, and because the other tends to be marginalized folks, monsters get coded as marginalized folks. Or they just are. I mean, Carmilla is a whole lesbian. That's not exactly coding. Well, I guess lesbians are lesbian coded, but you get what I mean. And this is what monsters were for a long time. However, the change for more sympathetic monsters didn't really get popular until more recently. One of the first sympathetic monsters was from our bestie Mary Shelley. In Frankenstein, the creature is honestly just going through it. No one was really clamoring to follow in her footsteps in that regard, but attitudes were very slowly changing. Another example, is the titular Phantom from the Phantom of the Opera. There's a couple of paragraphs towards the end of the novel that talk about how the Phantom was mistreated because of his abnormal appearance, and hey, that's kind of fucked up, and we as a society should maybe not do that anymore. As time has gone on, the way we handle monsters has changed a bit. They're far more sympathetic, but they still have aspects of the other, and it's these things that make them so relatable to people. This is something brought up by Laurent Reedus in his video, The Shape of Water, Falling in Love with Monsters. He says, monster movies are the perfect allegory for what it's like being queer, a person of color, or both in America. Depending on the era the movie takes place in, racism and LGBTQ phobia ostracize a lot of individuals. And it's because of that ostracization that it would make sense that those affected would find the monsters in monster movies relatable. After being called an abomination for being attracted to the same sex, you might find the actual walking abomination that is Frankenstein's monster and how he's treated throughout the film as relatable. And this is what leads us into what I consider the correct way to be a monster fucker. It's not just finding the monster relatable, but also seeing the beauty in differences. It's seeing the monster for who they really are and loving them regardless of how society sees them. It's finding love despite society saying it's disgusting and wrong. Both of you are disgusting and wrong. For the way you look, the way you act, what your gender is, what your sexuality is. That doesn't matter in monster romance. The monster loves you anyway. The monster will always protect you. The monster is the other. You are the other. You both are in love and find the best in each other in a world where the powers that be want both of you dead. Although I think there's a right way to do this, I'm gonna be real, we still have animal bridegroom stories. Beauty and the Beast tales are still really popular, and I think unfortunately, a lot of people still have that old traditional mindset when it comes to monster romance. Their minds are still stuck in the, Papa says I must marry the local lord, whom is 5 times my senior and becomes like a Karen at the apothecary. But alas, I can fix him with my virtue and kindness era. I've seen quite a few anecdotes about this on Tumblr, and to quote user Largish Cat, this isn't a metaphor for your shitty boyfriend. But because there's this giant misconception about modern day monster fucking, like, the genre is kind of vast and there's a lot of different interpretations going on. So what I'm about to say is going to be a bit controversial, but although I do think there's a correct way to be a monster fucker, and I want to be extremely clear about that, the genre feels kind of vast and monster fucking means different things to different people. I see 3 different categories when it comes to this genre. The first, which I'm not gonna really dissect because I don't think there's a lot to talk about, is just, you find non-human creatures attractive. You're not there for the symbolism, there's no deeper meaning, it's like finding blondes attractive. It's just a thing, but instead of hair color or eye color or something, you just think dragons are hot. There's really nothing special about it. The second goes alongside traditional animal bridegroom folktales. The monsters are made to be tamed and at the end of the story, transformed into what the reader really wants. A hot person who's now a good spouse. Again, I don't like this is rancid as fuck, but unfortunately I feel like we need to at least discuss it and kind of acknowledge that this is unfortunately a thing. Third, which I'm gonna be honest is the correct and right way to be a monster fucker for reasons I'll get to in a moment, is readers finding comfort in the monster. To look at the deeper symbolism and what it means to be a monster to society and finding love and relatability in that. And of course, these concepts can mix. A lot of times I see 1 and 3 mixed. A lot of people do find monsters physically attractive, but they also like the deeper symbolism. Hi, Editor Mari here. So while I was editing this, I realized I sounded like a bitch, and also I don't think I got my point across clearly. When I say the right way to be a monster fucker, I'm comparing it directly to the second way and the second way only. Like, I'm only comparing ways 2 and 3. I'm not shading people who think werewolves are physically attractive. I just want to make it clear that I really hate that second way, but I realized as I was listening back to this while video editing that it sounds like I'm saying people who think monsters are hot aren't doing monster fucking the right way, and that is absolutely not what I meant. You guys are obviously doing monster fucking right. I just really hate the modern animal bridegroom way, and forgot to specify that I'm directly comparing ways 2 and 3 and not including way 1 in that comparison. That's just, it's its own thing. I'm not trying to put her in that competition. I just realized that I just did not specify that I'm comparing ways 2 and 3 and then 1 is just kind of there. So my apologies for that, I really should have worded that better. But I bring this up because I think for better or for worse, the monster fucking genre is vast, and while I do think a lot of people would point to the third point as being the true way, I'm people, I think because of the history and the prevailing popularity of animal bridegroom stories, and cishet people not fucking getting it, that, they probably at least should be tangentially discussed. The reason I'm being such a little hater with the animal bridegroom way is because the main theme of those stories is power, and frankly, that has no place in the modern day. I have nothing bad to say about the prompt, marrying a monster, or having to stay with a monster. The sole problem of that type is power and seeking power over your partner. That's bad. That's the tweet. I genuinely feel awful for women of the past, and I can see why these stories would have been a massive comfort to them. If you have a horrible husband, of course you would dream about him changing. but also being the one to change him and have him indebted to you for that. In a world where women were property and had no power, I see the appeal of this. And considering how modern society pushes women, cis or trans, to be with men that don't truly value or care for them, I can see why some women would see these ancient animal bridegroom stories and also find comfort in them. But here's the thing. Monsters represent the other and have for centuries. While at one point the monsters in these stories may have represented a terrible husband and nothing more, that is not the case anymore. So when you have modern women writing monsters and having power over them, it reads like wanting power over marginalized people or wanting to fix them. Yeah, I can't really stress just how bad that is. I think in this point in time, if you're gonna do a power fantasy romance, just don't make one a monster, just don't do it. He can be just some guy, it's fine, just don't make him a monster. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if you can really remove the other from monsters in this day and age. While I know a lot of people would consider that the solution, I genuinely don't know if that would really be, even if you could do it. Monster romance has become a safe space for marginalized writers, so when you have these authors coming in and writing power fantasies, it doesn't really make it a safe space anymore. And while I wish I was just speaking hypothetically about all of this, unfortunately no. This is a problem within the romance space. It has been for a while. One Tumblr user, Largish Cat, talked about their experience going to a monster romance event after The Shape of Water had been released, and this is what they had to say. I had to hear straight women talk for hours about how the appeal of monsters is some kind of weird taming the beast fantasy. Loving a monster until it loves you back, sounding like every bad Beauty the Beast take ever. And there's my queer ass being like, literally none of you get it. This isn't about power, this is about love and alienation and acceptance. You dumbasses, I'm the monster! This isn't a metaphor for your shitty boyfriend. This is a metaphor for my own alienation from a society that tells me the way I am and the way that I love are grotesque. This is a fantasy of love free from judgment, separate from societal standards that I'll never live up to anyway. And then another user, Red Waltz, chimed in with the following. The other in The Shape of Water is just as much, and likely written as, being a different race and the feeling of alienation of having a different place of origin. It happens to resonate with everyone who's ever been considered a monster by society, and there's not just one way this has happened. The whole love someone until they're not a monster is extra super gross in that context because people don't feel BIPOC are actually capable of human emotions, who need to be taught to be human by some benevolent white person who's fetishized their body. Like, they've both said it far more eloquently than I ever could. This is why I keep harping on that there's a right way to do monster fucking. Because there is. If you have a monster coded as a person of color, and you have a woman doing that whole, I hate even saying this phrase, taming the beast angle, it ends up grossly racist. And unfortunately, a lot of people haven't come to that realization that like, hey, this is bad. So you can see why I don't like that way. I honestly wish I could just ignore that it exists. But frankly, considering it's not just in the history of the genre and people are still doing this shit, I feel like it has to be discussed. For better or for worse. For worse, I feel like every time I remember this form of monster fucking exists still, I lose brain cells. So, where does Malleyuu come into this? I'm gonna be real. All of it. I think there's all three of these categories in Malleyuu, and that's why it's the monster fucker ship. While I think it more heavily leans on the based way, it does have shades of the other categories. It's monster fucker past, present, and future. We are finally back to Malleyuu. I know we had to take a lot of time and energy off of them, but we needed the setup for this section. So let's link all of this back to monster fucking, starting with category 1, basic attraction. And y'all, I'm gonna be real here. Textually, we don't have a lot of support to say that Yuu finds Malleus in his dragon form attractive. We straight up don't know. Although we sometimes get their internal, thoughts and everything, we don't know what they're thinking when he's in dragon form. But we do know they seem fascinated and unafraid of Malleus' more inhuman parts. That's something at least. Like I said earlier, Malleus gives Yuu permission to touch his horns, and that's an extremely vital part for dragons. He says in his ceremonial robes voice lines, "Are you looking at my horns? You're welcome to touch them, though I can't guarantee what would happen to you if you did." So he's making this face, and considering he has only 2 lines where he acts slightly irritated to actually irritated Yuu was touching him, I think that last bit is a little, But more importantly, this line establishes that Yuu is fascinated with his horns, and in my opinion, it doesn't seem out of disgust or anything. During Terror's trending, Malleus has his real tail out for his Halloween costume while the others in Deosomnia have fake ones. In his voice lines, he says, "This tail? Oh no, it's very much real, I assure you. I understand your interest, but please don't get too close. It could easily send you flying." This outright confirms Yuu is fascinated by these more monstrous parts. And I would think Malleus, after having to deal with a lot of people treating him like a spectacle and getting grabbed by strangers constantly for the past week, would probably be more on edge and suspicious about anyone eyeing his dragon parts. So the fact he's so chill with Yuu tells me that 1, he trusts them to an extreme, and or 2, he doesn't detect any sort of repulsion or any sort of weirdness from Yuu when it comes to his non-human body parts, and therefore feels fine speaking casually. And like I said, while I don't think we have enough information to say whether Yuu finds these parts attractive or not, I still think it's interesting considering some people in our world just find monsters attractive, and here's Yuu checking out Malleus' horns and tail, something that very easily denotes him as being a dragon fae. They're definitely not freaked out by it. For the second category of monsterfucking, the animal bridegroom stuff, I think Malleyuu is actually a very interesting subversion of a lot of these stories. The ship itself doesn't really play into the whole virtuous partner transforms a beastly partner or man learns that non-men are people stuff. But aspects of the ship still play with a lot of concepts from these folktales. Had Twisted Wonderland not been a game and also it came out ages ago, I could see Malleus being cast as the animal bridegroom in a story like Beauty and the Beast. He's a wealthy prince, he's a dragon, he has a bad temper, and he's arrogant. But truthfully, there's not a lot that ties him to the more cis-women-centric animal bridegroom stories played straight or subverted. Like, yeah, Yuu is vastly different from the protagonists of those tales in that they don't seek to change Malleus. There's a lot to be said about Malleus, on the other hand. Like I said, in a lot of male-centered animal bridegroom stories, the man has to humble himself and put up with an uggo wife and treating human-like people before he gets the reward of a hot wife. Malleus is like the complete subversion of this. Or opposite, whatever you want to say. While those men begrudgingly relent and humble themselves by marrying unattractive women or creatures, Malleus, in pursuing Yuu, would actively be pursuing that humbling experience. He doesn't bitch and moan about it like the men from those folktales. He actively wants it. The men in those stories initially consider the marriage as a sacrifice of some kind. That is straight up not Malleus' thoughts at all. Having Yuu would be the best thing in the world to him. And when it comes to Guy tries to control supernatural wife stories, Malleus is a subversion there too, but not entirely. It's kind of complicated. For starters, Malleyuu is supernatural husband, loves and respects basic spouse, and considers them an equal, so that's already the complete opposite. When discussing these folktales, Princess Weeks talks about selkies and how a lot of stories in this vein are men, quote, humbling their hoes, but also taking their power so the man is the powerful one in the relationship. And Malleyuu isn't that. In that sense, Malleus does not seek to control Yuu. While he's protective of them, yeah, he's not controlling or insists on being the only one with power between the two. In fact, he actively encourages Yuu to find their own power. In his elaborate voice lines, he tells Yuu, "You can't use magic, right? Then you would be wise to shield yourself with the power of knowledge." And then in his PE uniform lines, when he tells Yuu Sebek has been begging him to help with his training, Malleus invites Yuu along. Those two lines illustrate that Malleus wants Yuu to have the ability to fend for themselves and be self-reliant. But on the other hand, Malleus does have some control issues. While I think we can all agree the main motivation for Malleus sending everyone into a permanent sleepy time is because he didn't want to lose Lilia, I would argue part of that was also because he didn't want to lose Yuu. When Yuu tells him they might have found a lead to, go home, he doesn't react poorly to them. But once they're gone, it's clear he's not happy about it and talks about them leaving him too and how everyone leaves him. This reaction seems to imply it's not just losing Lilia that's making him upset, but also the prospect of losing Yuu. So while Malleus wants Yuu to be able to handle himself, he does want control and keeping them with him forever. And there is an element of this that's very similar to the controlling the supernatural wife stories, since like those men keep, say, selkies with them, Malleus wants to keep Yuu with him. But on the other hand, the motivations are different. Those men want to have a beautiful wife and control her for power reasons. Malleus wants to keep Yuu because he doesn't want to be alone and they're important to him. They're very, very important to him. So it's not like for some weird alpha male bullshit reason or whatever. Both are bad, let's be real here. Wanting control over your partner is not good, but I think one is very clearly worse than the other. Malleyuu, although they have some ties to other categories of monsterfucking, are far more connected to the third and best category, finding love in the monstrous, society-dependent. Loads of people are terrified of Malleus, and if they weren't before his overblot, they certainly are now. But Yuu isn't afraid of him. Even after they find out who he really is, they don't start being scared or something. He's still the same Malleus, the same Horton to them. His identity as Malleus Draconia doesn't change how they feel about him. Take his name reveal in Book 5. Malleus shows up to a destroyed Colosseum stage, and when Yuu cheerfully calls out to him using their special nickname for him, Horton, the others freak the fuck out, demanding to know if Yuu has a death wish. But even after Vil informs Yuu of Horton's real name, they can have one of two reactions, a bit of surprise or being like, oh, so that's what the MD on the card stood for. Two very chill reactions compared to everyone else, including Grimm, who gets freaked out after learning Horton is Malleus. Him being Malleus Draconia, the 5th strongest mage in the world, doesn't really mean anything to you. He's still the same guy they've been friends with the whole time. And not only does their lack of a reaction show that, but their actions going forward do as well. Yuu has a distinct lack of fear when it comes to Malleus, in stark contrast with the people around them. The status of monster that Malleus has doesn't apply to them, and frankly, they don't seem to care that he has that status. They see each other as themselves, as people, which is a massive tenet of monsterfucking. Like I talked about earlier, Malleus is kind of isolated from other people, much like vampires of old living alone in castles, or just alone in general. I guess Dracula was in a castle because he was a count, not because he was a vampire, but anyways. Yuu, although they have friends, is considered an outsider to a lot of NRC students, and yeah, they are an outsider in Twisted Wonderland. Malleus and Yuu both know what it's like to be on the outside looking in. It's isolating being the monster, but it's something you can relate to and has in common with Malleus. So much of being a monster is isolation, and they're not only finding common ground in that, but actively working against it by constantly sneaking out at night to see each other, and during the day, going and doing things together. They love each other's company, but I have to imagine a part of it is them making sure the other feels less lonely. And I can also speak to how Yuu is actually pretty isolated, physically, from the other students as they live in a ramshackle dorm and not an official one. Ramshackle is the only dorm on school grounds and not in its own pocket dimension. The only other inhabitants are Grimm and 3 ghosts. Yuu is kind of on their own for the most part, whereas the other dorms have dozens and dozens of students around. Out of anyone on campus, Malleus would be the most in tune to Yuu's feelings of being an outsider since it's something he goes through. And as someone who's been isolated, Malleus of all people will want to make sure Yuu doesn't feel the same pain he does, and vice versa. I wouldn't call this a main tenet, but a lot of people, when talking about the appeal of monsterfucking, talk about not only relating to the monster, but loving the idea of being loved and protected by the monster. And Yuu checks both of those boxes off. They can clearly relate to Malleus, like we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about, but there's also that protection fantasy going on. Even though Malleus does want Yuu to be able to protect himself, he's very clearly protective of them and has no qualms swooping in to save them. We have the earlier example from Glory's Masquerade to go to, when Malleus tries to save Yuu and only Yuu from falling through that trapdoor. There's also terrors trending. After a load of tourists keep trespassing into Ramshackle Dorm and causing problems for Yuu, we see Malleus not only upset because this is low-key his fault, but also extremely angry and having to rein it in before he straight up kills people. He recognizes he's put Yuu in a bad and potentially dangerous situation, and so he does what he can to not only protect them, but to get revenge. Which is pretty sexy, I'm not gonna lie. I love it when he gets angry at other people. And one final thing I think is interesting is symbolism. Like monsters have some kind of symbolism behind them, we can read Malleus as having some as well. Malleus is symbolic of the old world before technology, when magic was still the main power source for things. And I don't mean just technologically, but socially when magic was at the top of the food chain. Malleus is extremely magically powerful, and he's really bad at understanding and working machines, from him not getting washing machines to constantly breaking his phone. These are 2 pieces of fairly recent technology, and him being terrible with them is not just comic relief, but it feels like magic butting up against technology and the two finding difficulties in being compatible. Malleus is a dragon, and during Lilia's quest to find a way to make him hatch, loads of people on his trips relegated dragons to folktales and not being actual creatures. The times are changing, and dragons fading into obscurity signals a transition into a new era. After all, remember how people were so afraid of Malleyuu not only because she's a dragon but a powerful mage? Emergent kinda laughing about dragons being real is a far cry from the reaction it would have gotten ages ago. And there's also some text in-game that makes me think the symbolism might be intentional. When Lilia is dying, he tells Malleus that Fae live in a very different world now, and this is something that, as far as I can remember, is repeated at least one other time. The characters themselves are taking note of the shift from magic being empowered to technology. Lilia, in that line, is aligning Fae with magic. And yeah, I mean, they need magic to live, basically. They are magic. So this all feels like it's pointing to Malleus, and the other Fae, to be honest, to be symbols of the past, an old world where magic reigned supreme. Malleus and Yuu, a thoroughly modern human, together would be a blend of the old world and new. But also, Yuu does have one interesting connection to the past, their visions. Where other people outside of Briar Valley don't really have a tie to the past, Yuu sort of does. Is it the same past Malleus represents? Not exactly, but them together is symbolic of a full history. Yuu being the present and the very, very distant past of the Great Seven, and Malleus being when magic was the leading power in the world. And honestly, I think that's kind of cool symbolism, like they are Twisted Wonderland, you know? At the end of the day, Malleus and Yuu are two people who have an extremely cute dynamic together, but are also the monsterfucker ship. They love each other for who they are, even though they're both outcasts within Twisted Wonderland, one for being a powerful dragon and the other being an isekai magicless human at a magic school. Despite the odds, they found each other. They found unconditional love with each other, and I think that's the purest form of love you can have. Malleus and Yuu deeply care for each other, and whether you see it as platonic or romantic, they absolutely love each other. And that's my Malleyuu video essay. This was a trip to write, but oh my god, it was really fun. I love Malleyuu, so being able to talk about it extensively is my jam, but also analyzing things is fun to me. I've mentioned it a few times on stream before, but I don't really watch gaming content on YouTube. I actually mostly watch video essays. So when I made the connection of Monsterfucking and Malleyuu, I knew I had to make Baby's first video essay. I hope you all enjoyed it. I do want to tackle other canon Yuu ships, but I don't know which one I'm going to do next. I'm thinking either Deuce-Yuu, Ace-Yuu, Sil-Yuu, or Jamil-Yuu, but I'm not really sure. If you want to make sure you see that whenever that comes out, be sure to subscribe so you get notified on uploads and everything. If you like live streaming shenanigans, I live stream on here and also on Twitch. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my ladyfingers-in-waiting who support me and allow me to continue to do this. A big thank you and telepathic snacky treat to Michgal2189, Visa, Omimi, Eel, Annette, Richter32, Yoza the Kiseki, Ukaku, Yungumo, Crabjail, Lady Lunarine, and Farafo. Thank you guys, and I'm care you all a lot. And if you've made it this far, thank you too. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see y'all later.